President Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today.
This is the first time the two have spoken directly since a deadly strike killed 7 World Central Kitchen workers in Gaza. Now, the president used this conversation to condemn what he described as the unacceptable nature of that strike and the worsening humanitarian situation in the war-torn enclave. Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressed just how dire things have become.
Despite important steps that Israel has taken to allow assistance into Gaza, the results on the ground are woefully insufficient and unacceptable. 100% of the population in Gaza knows acute levels of food insecurity. 100% of the population is in need of humanitarian assistance. And those working heroically to provide that assistance are doing so in great peril to their own lives.
CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis is in Washington. So let's start off by talking about the president's call with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because we heard the secretary discussing that. Is there anything that you heard in there that might mark a shift in U.S. policy when it comes to how the U.S. interacts with Israel?
Absolutely. So, yes, the secretary started out by detailing this call that just concluded between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And the contours that Blinken offered suggested that it was a tense call, that the president delivered some stark and concrete messages about the Israeli government's policy toward Gaza. He said that the overall humanitarian situation was unacceptable, that the U.S. needed to see specific, concrete, and measurable steps announced immediately by the Israeli government to address humanitarian harm and the safety of aid workers in Gaza, and that U.S. policy with respect to Gaza would be determined by Israel's immediate actions in response to these humanitarian issues. Later, when he was pressed during the question and answer section, the secretary said, if we don't see the changes that we need to see, there will be changes in our own policy. He did not specify what those might be, but obviously the most prominent options being discussed publicly is the conditioning of military aid to Israel, something that Democratic allies of the president have begun to call for in Congress. That would be to condition or to slow the pace of military aid that the U.S. continues to supply to the Israeli government. We don't know that that is the policy change that the president suggested and that the secretary today alluded to, but that is among the options that we know have been publicly discussed.
And Olivia, what's interesting is President Biden has called for an investigation into how the IDFs, attacked the World Central Kitchen staff and the driver, but hasn't called for an independent probe. I get the sense that behind the scenes privately, this was a tough call with a lot of pressure placed from Biden onto Netanyahu, who himself is facing political pressure locally in Israel. So did you notice a difference in anything the secretary said about that conversation that's apart from what we've heard previously?
Absolutely. And the press actually asked this of Blinken, too. They said, what changed in the last 48 hours since this attack took place? There seems to be a shift in tone from the United States government, which initially had expressed grief and condolences that this tragedy had happened, and now seems to be taking a much tougher stance on the Israeli government, saying that concrete and measurable steps need to be announced immediately in order to affect the flow of humanitarian aid that still continues to suffer from bottlenecks and other complications on the ground in Gaza. I think that you heard Blinken say that he was outraged, that he was focused on the people and the personnel involved in that incident, but that he has consistently said that the humanitarian aid situation in Gaza is unacceptable, that the Israeli government needs to do more. And yes, it is true that the Prime Minister, that Benjamin Netanyahu, is under increasing political pressure. One of the war cabinet members, Benny Gantz, has recently called for fresh elections to take place early in September of this year rather than in October of 2026. We've seen thousands of people come out to protest. And so we'll see whether this is a kind of final straw on the camel's back to see whether there's a marked change in the way that aid continues to get into Gaza.
Well, let's talk about aid to Ukraine, because we also learned today that NATO leaders plan to play a bigger role with security assistance to Ukraine. Blinken obviously talked about the United States and our obligations. Talk to us about what that assistance is going to look like from the rest of the NATO partners and the significance of it.
Sure. The thing he started out by stressing was that this $60 billion supplemental that has been languishing in Congress absolutely needs to get passed, that will be the most important material help that would benefit the Ukrainians in their fight against the Russian invasion right now. But he also said that there were active discussions about support for Ukraine going forward among the NATO alliance. He said that they are working together to build out a force for the future. There are more than 30 countries that have signed bilateral agreements with the Ukrainians, and the U.S. is working on its own bilateral agreement with Kyiv. So we'll look to see when that one is concluded. There are continuing discussions leading up to an additional NATO summit that's going to take place here in Washington in July. That the Ukrainians are also expected to see how their membership towards NATO makes progress. He did not come down on whether he supports the NATO taking up more responsibility for Ukraine aid, but we'll see where those discussions go as the weeks and months progress.
Olivia Gazis, it's great to have you walk us through what was just announced there by the U.S. Secretary of State.